Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is just gone 2:30. I will start the meeting. Could I remind members that this is a public meeting and it is recorded. By taking part in this meeting, you are consenting to your comments and yourself being recorded, and the recordings will be kept for access by the public as well as being on the. So thank you. Item 1 on the agenda is minutes of the previous meeting, the Standards and Resources Committee meeting held on the 24th of November. And we approve those as being a true record. Thank you. Very much. Are there any apologies, Mrs. Fox?
Yes, Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Mrs Kay Perry, Councillor Reid and Parish Councillors Mrs M Roberts and Mrs V Chapman.
Mrs. Chapman is likely to join us late, I think she said to me, so she may be along a little later. Are there any declarations of interest? No. Right, we'll go straight into item 4 then. Can I introduce Matt Powis, who is our Elections and Executive Support Team Manager. You're relatively new to the authority, Matt, are you?
In 3 months.
3 months. I thought that's relatively new to most of us. Yes, relatively new. Welcome to South Staffs and welcome to the committee. We have quite a comprehensive report with lots of information in our pack. So Matt, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just briefly go over the report, and obviously it is quite comprehensive, just a summary. Every authority is required to carry out a review of polling districts and polling places in the borough every 5 years to ensure that reasonable facilities are provided for voting and polling places are easily and accessible to members. So we conducted the review in October of last year and it was completed just January that's just gone. So the outlining changes are in the appendices, which the consultation responses are in Appendix 1, which there are a couple. The final polling station scheme is in Appendix 2. The Appendix 3 is the final polling station scheme for the full details. Appendix 4A is the maps and 4B is the area maps. The summary of the changes which are on the colour-coded sheet with the yellows and the blues and the greens is quite comprehensive and outlines any of the specific changes. I'll take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. So are there any questions or comments for Matt? Councillor Boyle.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at page 6, 4.1.20, is it? Chesinhay in particular, polling station, the Salem Methodist Church is now no longer available, and it's causing a double station at CDB. And I understand that last time we used Chesinhay Working Men's Club, but this time they refused us for some reason. Have you got any feedback as to why? Oh, sorry.
I don't have any specific feedback at the moment, but I can certainly have a look for you and get back to you with a specific response.
Thank you for that. But I inquired, I spoke to someone, we have a consultant working with us on this. I forget his name was now. Yeah, and he said, I arranged the meeting in Chesinhay with my clerk, I'm chairman of the Parish Council as well this year, to look at the locations and to see if we could sort something out. He didn't arrive, but in the meantime, on his way home from somewhere, he called in, had a walk round, made a decision. Now, that wasn't very satisfactory for me as chairman of the Parish Council. I could explain that back to my parish. But I went along and asked the clerk, the steward from the Chesinhay Working Men's Club, why was the reason that you wouldn't release the building for this time around? He said, well, we got Slimming World on a Thursday, but they could move probably, but they didn't get any remuneration. There was no fee paid last time. I thought that's strange. I want to know, is that too? Because I can understand why they wouldn't release the building for a day if we didn't pay them anything.
So we we would actually pay fees for obviously the hiring of polling stations and obviously the electricity costs and associated costs of being the polling station. I'm not aware of the specific circumstances around Cheslin Hay, but I'll certainly investigate for you and get back a response.
Could investigate, because I don't, perhaps the next, it's too late for this one, but the next time we have an election, right, might be next year, right? Then that building will be very useful, because where it's situated, it's in the centre of the village, and a lot of the people on the estates close by can access it easily. So I would appreciate if you could follow it up, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reassure members, although this is obviously the proposed scheme following the consultation period, the Chief Executive does have a delegated power to make any changes if necessary. So if even between now and the May 2023 elections it became necessary to amend one of the polling stations, then that could be done under the Chief Executive's delegated powers. Obviously what we're proposing is what on the current round of consultation is being proposed as the best solution. But absolutely, Councillor Boyle, if that situation changes, then we can look to make an amendment.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Are there any other? Councillor Hinkley, Mrs Hinkley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's the same problem, actually. This is Kimber. And unfortunately now, the people from Potters Cross End have now got to walk down to the Kimber Sports and Community Centre, where it used to be at Potters Cross, the polling station, at the Methodist Church. Now, I think it was the last time, they had problems getting their money from the council to pay for the electricity and everything at the hall. So I don't know if that was the reason that it's not available. But I am just sorry that our people, a lot of old elderly in Kimber, got to walk a long way, about a mile and a half, down to the Kimber Centre. So just got a worry or a concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Mrs Fowkes if there was some process or some mechanism whereby people could raise these issues. They do seem to be very local issues that have arisen since this was drawn up. Is there still a sort of process by which these points like Councillor Boyle and Councillor Mrs Hinkley have raised?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I can only apologise for obviously all of the the issues affecting your constituency and Councillor Boyle's constituency. Any queries or concerns, feel free to obviously contact me directly, and I'll try my best to investigate for you. And I'm sure there was obviously a reason why the Methodist Church on this occasion has declined us. If it is a payment issue, we'll certainly investigate, and for next time we can have a look and see if we can reinstate the Methodist Church.
And all I'd say is, Chairman, obviously is, this did go out for consultation, so there was an opportunity for comments to be made on the proposals. As you'll see, we only received a very limited number of comments in respect of those proposals. So on that basis, because we didn't receive any adverse comments, those are the proposals that are before you this afternoon.
Councillor Mrs Allen?
Thank you. I just want to raise a concern about the pavilion in Purton. Well, in the past we've used a school hall there, and I well understand why they don't want people on their premises. However, the pavilion is on a route which is to get into the pavilion you have to walk up a gravel path which is not suitable for wheelchairs, as you appreciate, or anyone disabled. There's a ramp into the building, fortunately, but the building itself has currently a hole in the ceiling, and I think because it's been leaking water, so at the moment it's not in a fit, habitable state. I also feel that it's not a well-lit walkway, and bearing in mind that stations are open quite late. And this is a concern to me because at the moment it's extremely muddy there, and the path is both wet and muddy. And I think, although it's a short walk from the pavilion car park, it's a walk which I think some people would be reluctant to take on their own late at night if they're elderly or in any way. So I'd like, if you're able to look at that as a site visit, I'd be pleased. And I think if it's possible to relocate that into the library or another more central building, notice we are using the library for the first time. So if it's possible to do something about that, I think it would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. As you can appreciate, obviously we are trying not to use any of the school facilities at this moment. And I understand there was a poll station at Purton Middle, I think it was Purton Middle School, but we'll certainly have a look at the individual circumstances of Purton Pavilion and check if we need to add in any lighting, etc. You know, to make it better for those voters that potentially will turn up. But I'll have a look for you and get a response.
Thank you. I know that just following on from Councillor Allen's comment, there was a letter from government a couple of years ago. I think it was just immediately after COVID, asking authorities not to use schools' premises for polling stations for obvious reasons. You know, there's been enough disruption with schooling, I think, and if you read the press, there are people still saying that we're still in the effects with young people having their education disrupted through COVID. So that's that. Are there any other questions or comments? I've just got one comment, or one question. In the absence of Councillor Reid, I'm sure he would have raised this. Whilst I'm responsible for Womber North and Lower Penn at the moment, and Lower Penn residents are part of that, it won't be after the boundaries review. And I noted that Lower Penn, it's not really clear where the Lower Penn residents will vote. All I can assume is it's got Treasel and Seaston, Treasel Ward, and Seasonwood and Pattingham Ward, etc. It doesn't say about Lower Penn. I'm assuming from that they may have to go to Treasel to the polling station at Treasel. It's got Pattingham, Treasel, Bobbington and Lower Penn as the revised ward. But it doesn't say exactly where they'll be voting other than Treasel Village Hall, the Green, Treasel, South Staffordshire. Is there another polling station that's not obvious on this list?
Thank you, Chair. I will double check for you. I think I want to assume that it would be the surrounding areas that would certainly vote for Lower Penn, but I will double check for you and get a response if that's okay.
Because my concern is that the residents of Lower Penn are used to having at least one polling station in Lower Penn itself, either at the Victory Hall or the church by the Green in Lower Penn, and Treasel Village Hall is some distance away from Lower Penn, some considerable distance, in fact, if you're on the outskirts of Lower Penn, around Radford Lane and those sort of areas. Thank you. If there are no other questions or comments, then shall we move on to item 5, the Elections Act 2022 with Mrs. Fabs? It's going to be Matt again. He's certainly having a baptism of fire to his first visit to this committee. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Chair. Like the previous report, I'll provide an overview and summary of the Elections Act. It's quite a comprehensive report. I'm conscious that there's several aspects of the Elections Act which affect the local elections coming to in May, and ones which come into after May. So I will discuss the ones which are for May, if that's okay. So the first aspect in May 2023 is requiring voters to show a form of identification at poll stations before a ballot paper is issued to the electorate. It also requires electoral registration officers in councils to issue a free electoral identification document called a Voter Authority Certificate, or VAX for short. And one of the main other aspects for May is to extend the accessibility of elections to ROs to take reasonable steps to provide support with those with disabilities at polling stations. So just on the first aspect, voter identification. So voters will be required to show a form of ID when collecting their ballot paper at a polling station. It doesn't affect postal voting. It is just as you turn up at the polling station, you have to show a form of ID. The acceptable forms of ID are outlined, which are the usual areas such as passport, driving licence, and a voter authority certificate, which I'll talk about shortly. So with the Act, it contains provision for presiding officers at the polling station to accept one of the documents, even if it's expired, as long as it is a reasonable likeness of that individual. And obviously the name on the ID should be the same as the registered on the electoral register. In terms of a national campaign, you might have seen on the TV or on billboards in your areas. I've noticed they've started to crop up. It's the remember to bring your ID. It's the little sticky note which has got a tick on. I know it started to pop up in several areas. So the Electoral Commission has started their national campaign. We'll be starting hours over the next few weeks to obviously, make sure that the electorate are aware that there is a requirement for them to bring in a form of identification, and we'll be using that for engagement activities. At the moment, obviously we're having discussions on the poll cards and how they will have to be amended as to include new information relating to voter ID. So potentially you're going to see a bigger poll card. So replacing usual A5, it's going to be an A4 to accommodate that new information. But as soon as obviously we have a confirmation on what that is, we'll certainly let members know. In terms of new signage, when you visit a poll station, you'll start to see new signage, which will advertise the fact that voter identification is required. So potentially with your poll stations, it will look and feel slightly different, as well as obviously having your usual signage such as don't use your mobile phone, and no smoking. So moving on to voter authority certificates. The government, as mentioned, have given us authorisation to carry out voter authority certificate checks for those residents that do need a form of identification that don't already have one. It's a free of charge service via the government portal. So similar to you applying for a passport or you registering to vote, you go onto the government website and go through the process for that. Current research. Hello. Oh, there you go. So current research is suggesting 2% of the population in our area require identification, which translate to about 1,700 electors. But there we go. So again, we'll do a comms campaign in terms of the voter identification, which will complement the national campaign, which is currently ongoing, and advertise the deadline to apply for a free poll card as well. Not free poll card, a voter authority certificate. So moving on to accessibility. So the Act seeks to improve the electoral process for people with disabilities and accessibility requirements. So at the moment, the government are currently out to consultation in terms of the specific arrangements for those accessibility requirements. But the Act requires each poll station be equipped to enable, make it easier to vote with voters that have sight loss or other disabilities associated. So obviously it just strengthens the existing requirements that we have at the moment. So you'll all be familiar with the large print signage that you see in postal in polling stations, and the tactile voting, etc. So the Act seeks for us to specifically look into those arrangements, whether we need, for instance, hand grips on pencils, whether we need to strengthen our tactile voting for electronic equipment, for instance, that will help that voter mark that X in the box. So as mentioned, there's other aspects to the Elections Act which are outlined in terms of the requirements that will be coming in after May 2023. At the moment, they're subject to change at the moment. We can obviously only know what we know so far, and I'll take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Certainly, Councillor Boyd.
Please, on the accessibility, I've read somewhere, like one of those sad people log onto the House of Commons website and have a look what's happening sometimes, about female voters having to have been accompanied or having a female there to deal with their vote. Is that going to apply in these local elections, or just for the general election? Nice.
Just to clarify, is that to do with voter authority certificates or voter ID? I'll double check that requirement. At the moment, we're still understanding and processing government guidance in terms of what we need to think about in terms of the equipment for the polling stations. I'll certainly have a look at that specific query. And I know with voter ID, for instance, there is a national discussion in terms of women with headscarves and other religious dresses that potentially will need another female polling station staff member to help them. And we're still understanding what that will mean for our stations, and we're going to provide obviously further information for our training as we get close to the day.
Thank you, Chair. That's exactly the point I wanted to get clarified, because it means you'll have a male and female people in the polling stations, isn't it? Because they don't like having masks taken off.
So just to mention, in terms of staffing, it's obviously going to be quite difficult for us to make sure we've got both a male and female in our polling stations. But obviously that's something that we are bearing in mind, and obviously we will try and obviously accommodate. But it's just having that contingency in place to make sure that those electorates that do want a female to check their ID, or to remove, help them remove their headscarf, etc., they can be accommodated for.
As Councillor Boyd, it was something that we picked up in this committee at least 2 meetings ago, I think, when this first arose about the changes in the voting regulations. We commented about when they said about privacy and identification, and we made the comment then about it may be necessary for there to be a female member of staff on the polling team if people had to remove their niqab or whatever it was to identify themselves. But certainly, if you read through this, we've got to provide private areas or screening for people to be able to do that to prove their identity. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you. I just want to ask about process, really, for the voter certificates. Clearly, there'll be a number of older people in our areas and vulnerable people who do not have the required documentation. Do they have to, because most of them will not be able to use the internet, I imagine. Is there any thought being given to asking, for instance, library staff to be able to take the necessary photograph, or are they going to have to provide a photograph themselves? Do they have to go to a special place or alert a special person in order to be able to get this voter certificate? Is there any thought being given to handling this locally, because some of these people are disabled and will not be able to travel necessarily, although I imagine some of them will have postal votes anyway. I feel quite concerned that we are disenfranchising people if we're not careful, if we don't make them aware of exactly what the process is and what they have to do to obtain this, because most of them won't have an up-to-date photograph of themselves either.
Thank you, Councillor. At the moment, we've started communicating with our customer service team in terms of doing an in-house, in-person service for those residents that can come to the council offices that don't have a photo of themselves or an up-to-date photo of themselves, or have difficulties accessing the internet. So at the moment, you can turn up and visit our front of house, and one of the staff members from customer service will help that individual fill out the application form online using the government website, and then the voter authority certificate will be sent directly to their address once it's been processed online. For those residents, as you've mentioned, that potentially can't travel to Codsall, that live in areas such as Kimber or north of the area, there is an option for a paper application, which we can send out. So if they call our customer service team, they can process that. Alternatively, if they contact the elections team as well, we can send out a paper application form. With the paper application form, they still will need to submit a photo, but obviously with the specific arrangements, if that's an issue, we can work with the elector to find a happy medium, which hopefully will satisfy both parties, because clearly we don't want to disenfranchise those electors that do need that form of identification. But in terms of those electors that will struggle to travel and don't have access to the internet, we'll try and work with them to try and find a solution.
May I just suggest then, since if you require a bus pass, you can go to the library and have your photograph taken, that some thought is given to, because they are more local, either allowing library staff to actually take the photograph so that they have one, or they can possibly make, for some libraries who's permanently staffed, make a visit, for instance, to an older person's club or facility where people could have that actually. And that would be a sensible way to approach this. I think because older people's appearance changes as well, in the space sometimes of 1 or 2 years, they are not the same recognition as they would have been, they might well have very out-of-date photographs.
Thank you, Chairman. What I would say as well, members, is obviously as members, you're out on the patch more than we are as officers, so it's very much taking forward that message around voter ID. The earlier people apply, the better. Our concern is if we have a large number, leaving it to the last minute and applying, that could cause difficulties. So, as you're out and about, it's very much pushing that message around the need for voter ID, and then for people that do have difficulties with that, let's have a conversation on it, and we can see what we can do to mitigate and manage that. But yeah, very much a plea really is to push out that message around voter ID, because it is a concern for us.
Are there any other questions or comments from anyone? Oh, okay.
May I just very briefly say then, please put the process into the paperwork that's going out, because
Councillor Mrs. Hingley.
Thank you, Chairman. It's about photographs. Our elderly would have to travel 5 miles one way or 8 miles the other to get a photograph taken. Would they accept just a family photograph of them, or has it got to be passport?
Thank you. Yes, it does need to be passport. However, it's not the strict requirements of passports. So what I would say is that if there is a plain background and it fulfills the requirements on the Electoral Commission's website, which I will circulate round to all members, then it will be hopefully satisfactory. It comes when you apply for a voter authority certificate on the government website, the application comes through to us in-house. So we actually have a look at the application, we have a look at the photos. We are getting a few at the moment in terms from application wise, and a lot of people have been using their doors as a sort of background, a white internal door, which as long as it is a plain background and it doesn't have a filter on, or it doesn't it breaches the requirements as set out in the Electoral Act, we obviously process them. So yeah, I do take your point, and I do take your point as well, Councillor. I'll send round the requirements, and as Lorraine has mentioned, it's just hitting home with your own patches in terms of what the requirements is, and let's have a conversation if those specific constituents are having issues. We can certainly try and help them. Okay.
Councillor Boyle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is possible to do this online direct, isn't it? It's like when you apply for a passport, you can actually get your photograph up on the screen. They'll tell you exactly what parameters to follow. Then, boom, it's done. So that sort of facility is available at most parishes. They've got a computer these days. Local people can go into local parish rooms just to make arrangements to get it done.
That's a good suggestion, and I'll certainly raise it with the parish clerks to see if we can. I'm happy to take any suggestions, to make sure the message is out there, because clearly we want the electorate to be easily able to get these voter authority certificates. But before that, if they do have existing forms of identification, your bus passes, your passports, your driving license, for me that would be a better approach instead of going through the process. This should be a last resort if you haven't got any. If that, yeah.
Just on a lighter note, Chair, be very careful if you're using a white background. I tried that and on top of my head disappeared in the whiteness. So if you haven't got much hair, be careful.
Does that answer your question, Mrs. Hingley? Councillor Hingley?
You can't just walk into a polling station. You have to apply to the district first. I'm not sure on this. Talking about a form you fill in and photographs. Sorry.
No, it's fine, Councillor. Just to clarify, when you go into a polling station, you'll be required to present a form of identification. So that's your passport or driving license or your bus pass, in order to receive a ballot paper. For those those people in the constituencies that don't have any of those forms of ID, they can apply for a voter authority certificate, which is a government issued piece of paper which says you are entitled to vote, and we've already seen and checked your identification, and we know who you say you are. So you don't have to have a voter authority certificate. On the contrary, we would prefer those people that have already got existing identification to use that, or expired, as long as it's a reasonable likeness. But this is for a proportion of the population that simply don't have any form of identification.
So, Councillor Hingley, you can't use your last photograph that was taken at Stourport Round Tables Ladies' Night, I'm afraid. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. On the elderly, as far as I can gather, a lot of elderly people, particularly in Purton, do have bus passes, which I know they are accepted, aren't they? So that I think will be a very sort of common stroke popular way of providing ID at the polling station. But it does bother me that there are bound to be a few people that may, in effect, slip through the net and turn up at the polling station not knowing about it. I haven't seen any PR so far myself, any publicity about this at all.
Thank you, Councillor. And obviously, we will take any suggestions on board in terms of how we can better advertise ourselves from a council perspective to entice those electorate if they do need any form of ID, voter authority certificate, they can apply for one. In terms of the national campaign, it's only in the past 2 weeks that it's commenced, so it's not like it has been going for 6 months. So we've only had access to the actual portal to approve voter authority certificates in the last month. So it is very fresh, and hopefully you'll start to see those messages come through on the TV, the radio, and obviously from our own side as well.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Davis?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's up to us as councillors to help get this message across as much as possible as well, if we can, for the sake of the electorate, and I certainly will do that.
Thank you. I know I have a niece who is just very early 60s, and she had got no up-to-date photographic identity. Her driving licence was still one of the old green paper driving licences. She wasn't of an age where she got to convert, and her passport was about 30 years old. I did take her to Buckingham Palace as my guest last year for an event, and she tried to blag her way past a young policeman with his passport that was 30 years old. But he was very, very understanding, and he did say, 30 years have been very kind to you. He said, unlike the gentleman who's next to you. So, are there any other?
Yes, just finally, I'm particularly concerned about people in sheltered housing and group dwelling schemes, because those are the people who are unlikely to have the required documentation. I wonder if it's possible to circulate those, particularly, we've got 40 or 50 flats where we've got people who I know will not be familiar with this and not have read any publicity necessarily, and some of them are vulnerable. Is it possible as well to recommend to them they apply for a postal vote, and what is the closing date for that?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll certainly have a conversation with our welfare team to obviously make sure we are, getting that message out there, especially with our vulnerable groups. In terms of the postal vote date, I will have to get back to you. I do have it down somewhere. I'll circulate that message around. That's okay, Chair. Okay. I'll double check and get back. That's okay, Chair.
Councillor Raeburn?
We know from the past in Penkridge that a certain care home had all postal votes, and it was filled in by the staff and sent off. Seemingly 99.9% all voted for one particular councillor, which I find a little strange. So if we're going to do that for care homes and or nursing homes, let us be a little careful, please.
Any comment, Matt? We'll take that on board, Councillor Raeburn. Yeah. Are there any other questions or comments at all? Any elections? No. Can I thank Matt for coming along this afternoon and giving us quite a comprehensive report. There was lots of reading there, and he's answered all our questions, I think, quite well. And those that he can't answer, he's going to come back to people. So on our behalf, I thank you, Matt. If you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're quite welcome. If you want to leave us, you're quite welcome to do that also. And we'll move on to item 6, which is a report on the work programme and complaints from Mrs. Foakes.
Thank you, Chairman. So, members, if I could just refer you to 4.2 of the report, which is on page 62 of your pack. We currently have 3 active code of conduct complaints. They have been referred to an independent investigator. 2 of those are now ready to go before a hearing of this committee, a subcommittee of this committee. So we're just in the process of setting a date for those hearings. So those members that are on the standards hearings subcommittee will be in touch with you shortly to arrange a suitable date. Both of those investigations relate to parish councillors. There is also one active complaint against a district member that is currently subject to investigation, and obviously I'll report back probably at the next meeting in respect of that complaint. As you'd expect, members, we would be looking to do a comprehensive code of conduct and training post the May 2023 elections, and that will be incorporated into the member induction programme for that period as one of the early training sessions for members. Attached to the report, members, are 2 reports from the local government ombudsman in respect of complaints that were made to that body following completion of the council's internal complaints process. Pleased to report that in respect of both of those complaints, members, they were both dismissed or even not investigated by the local government ombudsman, and full details are set out in the appendix. Finally, members, we were due to bring a report in respect of data protection to this meeting, but unfortunately, due to other work commitments, that's been delayed slightly, but that will be brought to the March meeting. I can reassure members there are no significant data protection issues to bring to your attention at this time, but we will be bringing a refresh of the policy to the next meeting. So the work programme has been amended accordingly, and as you see at your next meeting, there are 3 substantive items plus the usual update report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Are there any questions to Mrs. Fowkes or any comments? No, thank you, Mrs. Fowkes, for your report. The next meeting, as you can see from the work programme, is on the 9th of March. So I look forward to seeing you all then. And if there's no further, well, what I would say is also, if there's anything that you think we could put onto the work programme, please raise it with either myself or Mrs. Fowkes, and we'll endeavour to do that. So on that note, I will formally close the meeting and thank you all very much for your attendance and for your contributions today. Thank you.